Oppenheimer, the latest film from Christopher Nolan, is now out in theaters, and there's definitely a lot to say about this film. This past weekend was definitely one of the more interesting weekends in recent cinematic history. Two major films happened to come out on the same day in a random weekend in July, and due to that fact, a lot of people saw this as a major double feature event. It even got its own name, Barbenheimer. So today, we're gonna look at the first half and better half of Barbenheimer, which was Oppenheimer. Don't worry, Barbie, I'll get to you soon enough. So Oppenheimer was a film that I've been looking forward to for a long time. I've even hyped it up on my channel to be a for sure masterpiece. So did Oppenheimer live up to my expectations? Well, yes. And no. But mostly yes. There is a lot of praises to be given to this film, but there are also a few shortcomings that it has which I feel like prevents it from being elevated to a masterpiece status. But let's start off with the good, because that'll take up the majority of this video, starting with the best part of the film, the acting. Was it really any question that the acting in this film was going to be good? Oppenheimer probably has the most stacked cast I've ever seen in a movie. And Nolan is very good at getting great performances out of his actors, and that most certainly is the case here. Cillian Murphy as Robert Oppenheimer absolutely steals the show. He covers Oppenheimer at a lot of different stages in his life, and his performance felt so consistent throughout. Cillian Murphy has such a talent for the subtleties in his acting. He doesn't even have to be saying anything, but you can just see the weight of his performance in his facial expressions, which is why he was such a good cast for a role like this. Oppenheimer isn't some elaborate personality. He's just a somewhat normal person who quite honestly is kind of bland. He just happened to create the most important invention in human history. So it's the small things that are really going to make a performance like this memorable, and Cillian absolutely succeeds in doing that. He's definitely going to get nominated for Best Actor at the Academy Awards, and rightfully so. Another person who gives a remarkable performance is Robert Downey Jr. as Louis Strauss. Robert Downey Jr. plays this character so convincingly that you just forget the fact that it's him playing this role, which is awesome to see because the last 15 years of his career have pretty much only been one role, which is Iron Man. So seeing him take on a wildly different role than what I'm accustomed to was so refreshing. Emily Blunt is also great as Kitty Oppenheimer. She doesn't have the biggest role for an actress of her caliber, but definitely makes the most out of her screen time. Matt Damon also gives a phenomenal performance. Just like Emily Blunt, he also doesn't have the biggest role for someone of his name recognition, but whenever he's on screen, he really brings a certain energy to any scene that he's in, and played off Cillian Murphy really well. Another thing that I think is very strong about this film is the metaphors and other elements that it chooses to explore. Right from the very first scene, we get a comparison of Oppenheimer to the Greek legend of Prometheus. I'm personally such a sucker for Greek mythological comparisons, so this film had me hooked right from the get-go. So in the legend of Prometheus, he stole fire from the gods and gave it to men, and for doing this, he was punished for the rest of eternity. And that's strikingly similar to the story of Robert Oppenheimer, so I can see why the film made that comparison. Oppenheimer is pretty much the modern-day Prometheus. Even though he didn't necessarily steal something, he created a weapon which released the greatest fire that had ever been made upon mankind, and he has to live with the consequences of his actions for the rest of his life. One of the major elements that this film explores is what exactly makes Oppenheimer tick. It's something that us as the audience are really trying to find out ourselves, but we never really quite get an answer to. Another part of the movie is also the other characters around Oppenheimer trying to get a gauge of his mindset. Is he a patriotic American dead set on helping his country? Is he a communist traitor who is secretly trying to get information to the Soviets? Does he really care about the fact that what he has unleashed upon the world will change the course of it forever? These are some of the questions that the film asks but doesn't really give answers to, which was definitely an interesting approach that they went with, and still has me pondering some of these questions as I sit here typing this script. Another element that I think is important to the story, which was actually only one line but kind of relates to the story as a whole, is when Kitty finds Oppie in the woods, who, let me remind you, is pretty shaken up by the news that he's just received that Florence Pugh's character just killed herself, and she tells him something along the lines of, "You don't get to commit the sin and then expect everyone to feel bad for you," or something along those lines. And I thought that this was a very interesting concept that they chose to explore. Kitty is kind of right. Oppenheimer knew full well what he was creating, so when he finally does create it and it kills hundreds of thousands and it really starts to take a toll on his mind of what he's done, are we really supposed to feel bad for him? He created the bomb that killed those people. On the flip side though, Oppenheimer might argue that yeah, I created the bomb, but I didn't want to. The only reason that I did it was because if I didn't do it, then the Nazis would, and would wreak havoc across the whole world world, so it was honestly just a matter of choosing the lesser of two evils. Both are very interesting points of argument and definitely gets you thinking about which one is right. This is also probably Nolan's technically best film. The cinematography and color grading especially are so good, and I also think that the score by Ludwig Göransson, however simple, is very effective. The audio was definitely a little off though. This has been a complaint of some of Nolan's more recent work, that it's kind of hard to make out at times exactly what the actors are saying, and that problem is still a little bit present here. But the big question that everybody is asking, is the story any good? A film can have phenomenal acting, great shot composition, a good soundtrack, but at the end of the day, if the story isn't any good, then the film is going to suffer. Well, I am happy to report that I did think that the story was quite good, but it's also where a lot of my issues with the film start to show their heads. I think that my main issue with the story wasn't actually the content itself, it's the way that it was presented. Christopher Nolan has a very specific style when it comes to telling his stories, and that is telling them in a non-linear structure. However, there is so much content that is covered in so many different timelines happening throughout this film that I actually think that the non-linear story structure actually hurts the film rather than helping it. We are constantly jumping between timelines, and it almost feels like whenever there starts to be a sort of build-up in momentum, we cut to a different part of the timeline, thus cutting the build-up that we were starting to feel. That's why I feel like a linear style story structure would have been better for this specific film. The best part of the movie for me comes in the second act, when they spend a considerable amount of time in the lead up to the test for the bomb. You feel that sense of momentum leading up to the eventual test, and the payoff is fantastic, with what is probably the best scene of the movie when they finally test the bomb. And as I said before, this whole spiel is not me trying to say that the story is bad, because I actually think that the content of this story is quite good. I just think that Nolan's specific style of storytelling wasn't the best approach to this specific film. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, because I'm curious to hear your guys' takes. Oppenheimer is a film that gets a lot of things right for me. You can truly feel throughout the whole runtime the care and level of craftsmanship that went into creating a piece of art like this. And whatever its shortcomings may be, it's still definitely a worthy addition into the Nolan collection of films, and in certain regards I think is some of his best work. So that's my thoughts on Oppenheimer in the first half of this Barbenheimer weekend. If you made it this far and want to see more content like this, please consider hitting that subscribe button so we can grow this channel together. If you want to be notified when I post my review for Barbie, hit the notifications bell. But anyways, that's all I got for today, guys. I'll see you next time.